We are joined by ALG President Rick Manning, who has just had an important phone call with a member of Congress. And I don't know if we would describe the news of this phone call as good. Rick, is that proper?
Well, we were just discussing. First of all, he was a former member. He has been out for about 2 years, but
Okay.
but we were talking about the deficit and the debt and how the solutions to this health emergency are about. It's going to end up costing the country about $6 trillion with a
Oh,
T. Our We're currently at a $23 trillion national debt. We will, before the end of this year, be at it's very likely we'll be at a $30 trillion national debt
oh.
within, certainly by the end of 2021. And so that's real life. That's real debt. And we're going to have a lot of bonded indebtedness out on the treasury markets as we try to sell this debt, because it isn't just the 2 trillion, 4 trillion, the amount of money we sell that's been dealt with for this crisis, but we're running $1 trillion deficit on top of that. Plus, various bonds mature and they roll them over and they resell them back on the markets. So we're going to have a significant amount of debt, bonded indebtedness on the market over the next 6 months to a year. And supply and demand typically dictates that when you have a big supply of something, unless you have a big equal or greater demand for it, the price for that good goes up, so you can attract buyers. And that's the real danger, is that because we've created so much debt to deal with this crisis, that we will in fact have few buyers for it.
Yeah.
Because the rest of the world's creating debt also, by the way, to do this. And so we'll have few buyers, and with few buyers and lots of debt, in order to get the money that actually goes with that debt, we will have to, at that point, the interest rates will rise, and it will create that's where you end up with a real disaster, when we end up with interest rates that are as opposed to being at less than 1% for our 10-year treasuries, when they go up to 4, 5, 6%, by the way, which is a historic norm. When they go up to 4, 5, 6%,
Not Jimmy Carter
suddenly,
levels.
yeah, well, Jimmy Carter levels were in the double digits
Yes.
in terms of what we're paying, but 5% is what they typically view as the norm in terms of what we pay on interest rates for our debt. So if you just go up to the norm with the additional debt we have and the amount of money we're going to have to refinance, what you're looking at is a wiping out the ability, just on interest payments, wiping out the ability for us to, as a country, to pay for things that we like to pay for, and that means defense.
Okay, we're on hold, it says. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first. Rick, are you there?
Sorry, somebody called me in the middle of
Okay. I thought you accidentally pressed the hold button.
But the interest payments on the debt will increase dramatically, and we're already nudging up close to what the total amount we spend on defense spending in terms of payments, overall payments on interest payments on the debt, which includes, by the way, the money we put back into Social Security, because Social Security buys treasury bills, treasury bonds, and then collects the interest payments on those treasury bonds as a means for payment. So that's where the money is generated. You don't just leave the money you collect, that you pay in on Social Security, into a vault. They buy treasury bonds, so it makes some money. And with interest payments low on those treasury bonds, it doesn't make much money. And then once those mature, they roll them over to the latest interest rate levels. And so that's how the Social Security Trust Fund actually works. It's how the Medicare Trust Fund actually works. And so when we have a massive amount of debt, it would be good for the Social Security system, because you get a lot more interest payments into the Social Security system. Unfortunately, it'd be bad for the Social Security system, because by then it'll be a net negative on the balance sheet, which it is now actually. And and the likelihood in terms of spending that off the general, looking at it on a general ledger, there are going to have to be choices made, just like there were in Greece, about dealing with people's pensions, which is Social Security, dealing with defense spending. How much can we afford to have? Dealing with food stamps. The 70% of our budget that's actually on remote control in the budget will have to all be examined, and people aren't going to like those outcomes. So we have to. This is the time when we have to get back to some kind of fiscal reality. And the backside of this crisis, we have to make major cuts in the budget in order to help put us back on a foot, give us a fighting chance to be able to start at least not increasing the debt. A balanced budget doesn't pay the debt; it just doesn't increase it. Yeah. And right now, we're on a track for spending $1 trillion more than we bring in, even when we had the greatest economy in the history of the world. So imagine 20 trillion people or 20 million people unemployed as opposed to 5 million, and what the spending is going to be to deal with those 20 million people. And those are the net problems. Those are the economic problems we're going to face. And it's why we have to get back to work. We have to get back to work. We have to save our small businesses by getting back to work and getting back into the swing of things. Because if we kill our small business backbone, it will be a decade to get back. And the question is, will we ever be able to get back? Because we'll be so encumbered with debt that we may not be able to function as a country, and we'll be at the mercy of those around the world who would be purchasing that debt or not purchasing that debt, depending on how they view the policies of the United States of America. So we are going to face some serious problems, real challenges. America has overcome those challenges in the past, but we're going to have to really tighten our belts and be smart in order to beat those challenges in the near future.
And it might be a good idea for us to request that some of these debts be forgiven. I doubt that'll ever happen, but I've raised that issue now, namely with China, that China forgives our debt as a sort of a payback for what they've done here. Now,
well, Frank, I think I want to talk about that because it's a great point. It really is a great point. It wasn't what we planned on talking about, and I apologize, but I disagree with some of my friends and you on this. It's for practical reasons.
Yeah.
I understand, saying China has about $1 trillion of our debt. Of the $23 trillion, they own about 1 trillion of it.
Yeah.
And it is natural to say, okay, we're going to default on the Chinese debt and just tell them, we're just wiping that debt out because you destroyed our country.
Yeah.
Well, challenge is, what are the other countries in the world, the other people around the world who own U.S. debt? How do they react to that? And since we do have $6 trillion of new debt we're going to be putting out on the market in the next at least between 6 and 18 months, we need people to be willing to buy that debt. And if they view that debt as being risky, that if the U.S. decides that if for some reason they don't want to pay the debt, that they could arbitrarily just not pay it, even for a good reason, like the virus that was unleashed, that the cost of that debt, we're going to have to pay a much higher interest rate on that debt. So if you want to create an environment where our interest rates on the debt go up because our treasury bills are less valuable or less desirable, then cancel the debt with the Chinese. And the net effect of that won't be to lower the debt. It will increase our debt service costs because we won't be able to borrow the money at 1% or 0.5%. We'll be borrowing the money at 5 or 6%. And as we explained, that is a disaster. And at that juncture, so the risk of canceling the Chinese debt does not, the visceral reward is we got them back. The risk is we end up not being the world's reserve currency, and as a result, we don't get to transfer our inflation all around the world as we continue to spend like drunken sailors.
Yeah.
Thinking that there's no downside to just spending for whatever we want. Now, at some point, some point you have to sober up, and we better start sobering up now because this is the time when we're going to have to start digging deep and trying to do what we have to do to pay those debts and to begin to at least get to a point where we're not running $1 trillion deficit every single year.
But now, would if China was the one that made the decision, if China said, "Okay, we're going to forgive you," would that
Oh, if
help?
China did that, that would be fine. If
It's
China
probably not
said
going to
no,
happen. Probably not going to happen. But
yeah, it's not going to happen. China's at war with us. It's a soft war, but they're at war with us. Make
yes,
no mistake.
a war
I'm not
beneath the
arguing
table.
this was yeah, I'm not arguing that this is that the virus was released intentionally. I'm not arguing anything, but China certainly did nothing to stop the virus and
No.
did things which actually promoted the virus from spreading around the world. And
Yes.
so and have been very willing to try to take advantage of the virus. And now they're trying to shift blame for the virus around the world to the United States and say, oh, we did it. When in fact, it clearly came out of the Wuhan labs. So so we're in a war with China. It's a soft war. It's not even a cold war because we trade together, but it's a different kind of war. It's a multidimensional war that they're fighting. We haven't been fighting. Donald Trump started to fight it, and we went from having the best economy in the history of the world in 1 month to having depression level inflation or depression level unemployment rate. And it had nothing to do with economics and fundamentals. It had everything to do with the virus the Chinese unleashed on the world.
Yes, and we've also lost over 10,000 people at this point. I'm going to get the exact number here. Um,
Yeah, it's about 11,000 people who have died of the virus in America.
yeah,
The,
I have
the numbers,
10,993 at this point. So yes, you are correct. Almost 11,000. And total recovered 19,000.
and today's numbers are going to look like a big jump. Um, Sunday's numbers in terms of deaths, and we've been tracking this. Sunday's numbers of deaths were a significant decline, and the decline was for one of two reasons. Either it was a real decline, or there was a reporting issue because people didn't do reporting on Sunday. We didn't see a jump on Monday, and a jump that was unexpected on Monday, but we did see out of New York in particular a significant jump this morning, and that reflects the people who died on Sunday, and they didn't report them on Sunday. So, which is why you look at a whole pattern. You don't look at just one day's worth of data. You look at long-term data. So today's number is going to jump significantly. It remains to be seen whether that jump is because of Sunday's people being pushed in or a real exponential jump. But I think it's likely, given the number on Sunday, which was about 800 total deaths, when it was projected to be about 1,800 total deaths. I think the number on Sunday is going to be, a lot of those deaths that occurred on Sunday are going to be pushed into the Tuesday number.
Okay.
And just be aware of that when the number's big, and you see it tomorrow, that this many people died. Just be aware that it's probably has a direct relationship to Sunday's number and people being, it's just accounting as opposed to actual people who an exponential jump in deaths overnight.
Okay. Now, we ran a piece at ALG about how 350 billion in forgivable loans over 8 weeks is probably just not going to be enough for 30 million small businesses. Maybe at best, from what I've gathered, it keeps them afloat, keeps them from dying, but they're not going to be prospering anytime soon. And that probably means they're not going to be so willing to hire.
Well, they're closed. I mean, the fact is, we've closed Small Business America, and the loan program. There's two loan programs available. One's the PPE program, which is designed to keep people 2.5. It's one everybody's heard about. Forgivable loan, 2.5 months of paycheck. It's paycheck protection. And if you keep people employed through the end of the year, it's forgiven. The loan is forgiven. The challenge with that, Frank, is very simple. The average person, the average small business, spends about 30 to 35% of their costs on labor, and 65 to 70% of their costs are based on other things they have to do, leases, debt that they have, inventory costs, all those different things that entail what a small business, their profit, obviously. So essentially, keeping for 2.5 months, keeping people's salaries paid is interesting, but you're still not covering 60 to 70% of the costs of the business. And in not covering 60 to 70% of the cost of the business, um, those small businesses with no revenues because they've been shut down die, and they don't reopen. And so that loan program is designed as a very short-term bridge, but it doesn't work when you have a shutdown for 6 weeks, which is where we're looking if we don't reopen until the end of May. So at that juncture, there's another program. It's called the EIDL. It's emergency defense loans. It's emergency loan. Just do that. And EIDL is a longer term loan. It gives you up to 12 months of revenues in terms of a loan. You don't have to do all 12 months. And it is a loan that is repayable over a 30-year period. And in that regard, that loan actually covers all of your costs as a small business. The challenge with that loan is that the SBA, Small Business Administration, has rules that say that the EIDL loan, which is actually the one that can help businesses get through a real emergency, which this is for them, a government-created emergency. Most of the businesses who would apply for it, who are really in trouble, don't have the collateral to be able to get the loan. And so it's a chicken and egg. They create loan requirements that make sense in a non-emergency situation, but don't reflect the needs in the emergency. And so the call to action on this for the SBA is to drop the collateral requirements, so people are able to do that. Recognize that the Federal Reserve is loaning money to the banks, is giving money to the banks at 0%. So the banks are getting the money for free. They're effectively then putting that money out as loans to small businesses. If the banks are getting 2% return on that loan in terms of interest, they're making 2% for being a pass-through for that loan over a 30-year period, which is a good deal. Given today's interest rates, it's a very good deal. Just look at what those same banks give you for your savings accounts, and you'll understand that the banks are paying nothing for money, and they're lending it out and even 2% is a pretty good profit. But the critical piece on this is they don't need collateral because they're getting the dollars for nothing. So if somebody's unable to repay that loan because they've gone out of business, the banks haven't invested any money into the loan. They didn't have to pay any money to get the dollars to loan you. As a result, essentially, the banks are at no risk, zero risk on these loans because it's free money to them and it's almost free money to you. Yeah. Given that, they should eliminate the collateral requirements because then there's no risk to the banks. There's no rationale behind not having collateral requirement. And those businesses that need these loans, the EIDL loans, which are larger and longer, and the repayment periods are not forgivable, but the repayment period is over 30 years, so it's spread out over a long period of time. Those businesses will, in fact, be able to survive over the long haul, whereas the original loan we talked about, the PPE loan, is simply a very short-term bridge. And we've already gone too far into this crisis. We've gone past the length of where that loan makes a difference for a small business in terms of its effectiveness related to their business survival.
Okay, now we got a message here from a live chat message here from a viewer, and I should read it. It says, Steve Clark, I believe he's talking about the amount of death that we're going to be calculating. Sure. He says, I think they should triple that, like what they are doing for their insider buddies. Someone politicized the flu season this year. It's a bogus test. Research it. And why did they change their projection overnight from 500,000 to 20,000? Look at the difference in those two numbers. If it's too big to ignore, it's too big to ignore.
Well, I think that Steve's talking about the 500,000, 200,000 was projection in Great Britain in terms of how many deaths would occur in Great Britain. The same projection that came out of a British health analysis team showed a 2 million people, Americans dying to 2.5 million Americans dying, and the number then dropped precipitously to what was the equivalent of about 100,000, 150,000 in terms of their guesses. And now we're looking at the charting that they're showing shows us about 81,000 projected deaths. But here's the truth. They're not going to get there. And the reason they're not going to get there is because 40% of the deaths are in New York and New Jersey, and the New York and New Jersey viral cycle is over.
Yeah.
It's dropping precipitously. We have very relatively few people entering the hospitals, a lot of people exiting the hospitals. And as a result, and we have a better understanding of the virus. We have, even Governor Cuomo is talking about the hydroxychloroquine as being a solution. And as a result of that, those death rates are going to drop dramatically. And as that solution becomes more and more prevalently used around the country, the death rates will drop precipitously. And as a result, the CDC today talked about how social distancing is driving those numbers down, those death numbers down. Well, I would argue that they want to take credit for social distancing, but I will argue that the aggressive efforts to make certain our hospitals had the beds they needed, had the equipment they needed to deal with the crisis played a big role, and the acceptance of a treatment, of multiple treatments, is going to play an even bigger role. So the question is, the president said we're closed till the end of May. At least that was the guidance. It seems to me that at the end of May, that this president should say, it's up to individual governors to gauge the situation in their own communities. But here are things that the public should do to keep themselves safe. And given that we're already sequestering the most vulnerable, the older populations and health facilities as being the most vulnerable, most likely to die from this disease, we have at that juncture, assuming we're able to get mask production up so masks are readily available, we should be able to reopen the doors, and governors should feel free around the country, if they don't have hotspots in their states, to open the doors and let the economy work again, because we cannot afford to have a permanent 20 to 25% unemployment rate until businesses are able to reestablish themselves and recover. And if we kill 50 to 70% of our small businesses, if we kill Main Street, there won't be jobs for people to go back to. And that kills more people than this virus will kill. So that's what we have to do. We have to get back to work, and that's and the timeline should be no later than May 1. And it's there's some things that has to happen, but I know the president's aware of those things, and I think he's very clear that he wants to get back to work as soon as possible. So let's just let him know that we want to get back to work.
Yes, absolutely. I think just about everybody, no one wants to be unemployed. Maybe 2% of the people living on unemployment are enjoying it, but just about everybody else is eager to get back.
Well, the challenge is now everybody thinks of this as being like a vacation at some point, a staycation. We don't have to go to work, blah, blah, blah. Well, the fact is that's not, that we're not going to keep people on staycation forever. And the sooner we get people off staycation, the better off we are as a country. And it's time to get off staycation on May 1 and as much as possible. And by the way, Frank, that isn't really the president's decision. It's the decision of individual governors and states.
Yeah.
And so Governor Cuomo may say in New York, well, we've still got hot spots and we don't want to do that. But there's absolutely no reason that if Elmira doesn't have anybody, and if 90% of the geography of the state don't have real problems with the disease, to sit there and say, well, we're going to keep the entire state closed down because there's still hot spots in New York City. That's really stupid. So even governors can use some discretion in terms of counties and regions that would not be impacted. And because we now know enough, we're smart enough, we're aware enough that we're not going to do things that actually make us more likely to get the disease. And by the way, with treatments available, the likelihood of us dying from the disease is dramatically diminished.
Yes. Now, I must note that Steve Clark here, who we answered earlier, says thanks for addressing that, so he appreciates it. Now, you mentioned the name Andrew Cuomo. I wanted to just quickly talk about the 2020 election. I see people are referring to him, some referring to him as President Cuomo. And that made me laugh. Remember, I spent a year and a half of my life with Andrew Cuomo, or dealing with him, and I learned a lot about the guy. One thing I recommend anyone who is becoming a fan of Andrew Cuomo do is Google Moreland Commission and Andrew Cuomo and see what he was doing there, basically hobbling an investigation into his administration over corruption, and then he canceled the Moreland Commission. There was a lot of other funny things he did. I got to say, he's got the Cuomo name that a lot of people like that. He seems to have a certain energy, but man, I'll tell you, and he was nice enough with us. I don't want to badmouth the guy too much, but I just don't think he's a viable presidential candidate once people learn about what he has done in his career and what he would likely do as president. And
Andrew Cuomo is Joe Biden's worst nightmare.
Yes.
That's just today there's the Wisconsin primary, and there's a move in Wisconsin to get Democrats to write in Andrew Cuomo as their presidential pick. That move is not designed to get Andrew Cuomo any votes in Wisconsin, but to start a groundswell of support for Cuomo heading into whatever they're going to do in terms of their convention. Because if they can, the truth is the Democrats' single worst nightmare is right now. They used to be that Bernie Sanders would get the nomination, and right now their worst nightmare is that Joe Biden will get the nomination through the primary process. And so, with all the canceled primaries and the like, the Democrats are now saying, "Oh, maybe we won't do those primaries. We'll just have delegates come from the normal, Democratic establishment. And when we get back to the convention, we'll just deny Joe Biden the first ballot votes, which will then free up all the delegates, and we can bring anybody we want to run." And that's Cuomo's pathway to the nomination. And the Democratic National Committee controls it entirely because they can sit there and tell people not to reschedule their primaries because it isn't safe. And in doing so, at that point, the party establishment will run the convention. If they choose to knock out Joe Biden because they don't believe he's the right candidate, they will do so. And the question will be which candidate emerges. And certainly Governor Cuomo is on the lips of a lot of Democrat voters.
Okay, we're going to have to end this soon, but Steve Clark has chimed in again. He's got some good observations here. He says, after thanking us for addressing the numbers issue, he says, it's almost as funny as President Biden. I'm assuming he was talking about the talk about President Cuomo. I guess more would write in Bernie. The Democrats were destined to sabotage Bernie Sanders, in my opinion. He didn't stand a chance this election or in 2016. President Biden, he looks like a man who's unable to even perform, not to mention his record. He just does not look like he's ready to perform as president of the United States. He just seems like he's, I don't want to say senile, but it just seems like he's slowing down in some way and does not have the ability to deal with the rigors of the presidency.
I don't think anybody can imagine Joe Biden being president in this crisis. So, by the way, Joe did decide the other day that shutting the air flights from China was something that he would have done. Of course, he criticized it for 3 months before he decided he would have done it. But he switched his position on the president shutting flights down from China back in January 31. He's now in favor of that move after criticizing it all this time, because now the meme is Trump didn't do enough fast enough. Whereas back then, what's Trump doing? This isn't a problem, because that's what Dr. Anthony Fauci said on January 26. This isn't something for Americans to worry about, was Dr. Anthony Fauci's public statement related to the then referred to Wuhan virus. And he was assuring the public there's nothing to worry about as the head of virology at the CDC. So get this. Now Joe Biden is saying, oh, the president didn't do enough fast enough, when everything the president did early was criticized by Joe Biden.
Yeah.
So it's when you don't have somebody like that can't be in a position where they have to make real decisions.
Yeah.
Because decisions can go wrong. Decisions cannot be the right decision. And Joe Biden has a unique capacity to be on the wrong, to make bad decisions on everything. So given a guy who's got 40 years of being wrong in his history, he's probably not the guy people want. Regardless, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Cuomo and others.
Yeah.
But there certainly is a move afoot to put Cuomo into the nomination slot.
Yeah. Steve Clark says, "Thanks, guys. Stay Corona negative." I actually remember people kind of viewing coronavirus in a comical fashion. There was the song "My Corona," or coronavirus, is that when you drink too much Mexican beer? But now people are taking it very seriously.
I'll have a line with it. As somebody who grew up in Corona, California, I am offended by the use of the word Corona to describe this. It reflects, I think it's an attack on my heritage. And as a result, I'm deeply offended by this characterization as it attacks my very heritage and the soul of my being. So I really wish that you quit calling it that, because I find it to be deeply offensive, Frank.
All right. We'll go back to either Wuhan virus or COVID-19. I actually kind of like the name COVID-19. It has a certain like sci-fi movie feel to it.
It sounds like covert 19.
Yeah.
But yeah, COVID-19, we can do that. Anyway, with that, we had something else we want to talk about, but I think we spent our time, so we'll talk about it again tomorrow. I am Rick.
And I am Frank.
And let's hit the subscribe button, folks. It's really appreciated. And we will be back with another episode tomorrow.
And we also have to thank Steve Clark for his contribution today. Thank you, everybody.
Wasn't Steve Clark, wasn't he like Wonder Woman's handler?
I don't know. That's before.
We're wrong on that. Am I comic book?
There's Clark Kent.
Clark Kent, but I thought Steve Clark was Wonder Woman's handler. Maybe I'm wrong.
I'll Google that. I'll Google that when we get off.
Well, we'll get back to you guys with that tomorrow.
All
with
right.
that, we'll signing off. Take care, folks.
I'll see you.